Hey everybody. Today I'm going to be looking at an article um, from the Washington Examiner about Noam Chomsky. Now, I feel like I have to preface this by saying I'm uh, an admirer of Noam Chomsky. He's uh, very knowledgeable and learned, and he's definitely one of the most left wing voices that really gets a sort of popular attention from the mainstream. And so, because of that, I think the American left has a real um, uh, uh, a real thank should be thankful to Chomsky for helping to spread leftist thought and criticism. He's been one of the most outspoken criticisms of U.S. imperialism and capitalism uh, in the West, and he writes very good works like Manufacturing Consent, um, which greatly criticize the role of capitalism in the American media. And so, all of that being said, it's fine to have disagreements. Unlike the right wing, where it's just generally an echo chamber, where, say, in the Jordan Peterson movement, if you aren't really on board with every single position that Dr. Peterson takes, and if you try to disagree, well, then the cult of lobster boys will jump on you and just uh, shout your voice down, um, and say, "Oh, you took him out of context." That's not, and I mean, there's always a certain amount of that in any kind of intellectual following. Um, but unlike somebody like Jordan Peterson, Noam Chomsky is actually smart, and he actually knows about the topics that he claims to have an expertise in. um, I can actually listen to Noam Chomsky. In fact, I think Noam Chomsky should do like ASMR audiobook readings because his voice, if I could just try to impersonate his voice, it's very, he criticizes like how languages originate and how they change. So, so anyway, I mean, Chomsky, all that being said, uh, he has a criticism of anti-fascism. So, um, let's see. It says the left-wing Antifa movement is rising in prominence after clashing with white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia. But one progressive scholar says the anti-fascists feed the fire they seek to extinguish. He says, as for Chomsky says, as for Antifa, it is a minuscule fringe of the left, just as its predecessors were. Noam Chomsky told the Washington Examiner. It's a major gift to the right, including the militant right, who are exuberant. Um, all right, to this, I have to say, um, the right constantly makes these crazy conspiratorial claims about the left and the Democratic Party being this like Marxist communist sleeper cell that without their constant vigilance and uh, I look at all the paranoia that Obama was this Marxist socialist who was going to come and establish a Soviet republic here in the United States, and just contrast that with Chomsky saying that it's a gift to the right, including the militant right, who are exuberant. I mean, and you see the claims about Antifa violence are extremely overblown, and the hysteria about Antifa is extremely overblown. Um, we can actually look at the 14th of uh, November event that happened. I want to say it was in 2017, um, but should probably be a topic for a future video. Um, so, Chomsky's criticism that it will like inflame the right wing and especially the militant part of the right wing, I think is sort of misunderstanding that the right constantly will make demons and monsters out of the left where none really exist. And so that sort of militarized radicalism, uh, it's always going to exist in terms of the left. So we shouldn't really be concerned about giving them uh, gifts, as Chomsky calls, by worrying about how they feel about our praxis. What we should concern ourselves with are not the concerns of these militant right wingers, but the concerns of the common people, the concerns of the class conscious proletariat in this country. And so, um, let's see. I'm trying to sort of gather my thoughts about this and reading the quotes. Um, let's go on. Let's say it says many activists affiliated with the loosely organized Antifa movement consider themselves anarchists or socialists. They often wear black and take measures to conceal their identity. Um, well, I mean, the reason they wear black is black is the commonly used as the color to denote the symbol of the anarchist struggle, um, or more broadly, just like a workers' struggle. Um, and then, of course, socialist. I mean, anybody who is class consciously minded is going to see the rise in fascism and the rise of what Chomsky calls militant right wing elements in this country. Um, and so Chomsky saying that Antifa is a gift for the right is kind of ignoring the fact that the right wing, it's not a gift, it's a response. It's a response to this rising up of ultranationalism and white supremacy we're seeing in this country. Had to drink some water there. Um, so Chomsky says what they do is often wrong in principle, like blocking talks, and the movement is generally self-destructive. When confrontation shifts to the arena of violence, it is tough. It is the toughest and most brutal who win, and we know who that is," said Chomsky. Um, all right, so there's a little bit more to unpack there. He says what they do is often wrong in principle, like blocking talks. Uh, Chomsky, I think he is a man who is very concerned with protecting the left from uh, just complete brutality from the right. But I think he's a bit too overcautious. He's a bit too coddling. He's almost like a very protective, uh, like fatherly figure who coddles the child and doesn't really expose them. Doesn't want them to leave the nest and stretch their legs. And how do you prevent this uh, open displays of fascism and white supremacy uh, without direct action? Uh, Trying to battle it in the free marketplaces of ideas is all good, but as we've all seen, the right wing is insidious and extremely skilled at using populist rhetoric and reactionary rhetoric to drum up their base and to whip the masses into their reactionary agenda. And so to block those talks, to show a display of force from the proletariat is the clearest way we can send uh, a message to the rest of society who may not be class conscious that there is indeed something wrong here. There's something wrong when white supremacists and fascists and hate mongers are allowed to go and speak to college campuses, which are supposed to be places of enlightenment, and they instead are turned into dens of reactionary fascist propaganda. So to block those, to do direct action, um, it is not only effective. We've seen we've seen the hilarious examples, of course, of milkshaking. Throwing milkshakes at these people, confronting them, publicly humiliating them, has an effect. If you show the common people how stupid their ideas are, of course they're going to change their minds. But saying we should all allow a voice here at the table. Well, no, there's no voice in the table for the proletarian movement for reactionary right wing elements. And if you want society to become a better place, you're going to have to either pick one side or the other. Because the truth of the matter is that right wing reactionary fascist speech tramples on the speech of its deterrents. And so by enabling the spread of fascistic reactionary ideas, you're crippling the left. Um, and he says that the anti-fascist movement is self-destructive. I don't understand how uh, being anti-fascist is self-destructive, because even in the midst of like the most um, uh, uh, brutal conditions of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, there were still certain anti-fascist elements in those countries that took action against their government. So it's not an act of self-destruction. It's an act of rebellion. It's an act of, I mean, if Chomsky was in uh, a fascist country, would he be against the direct confrontation of say the Gestapo or the fascist black shirts coming down the street and raiding shops? The only way to confront things like that, uh, when we live in a country whose president essentially condones these kinds of actions, is you have to be able to directly confront them. And it's not going to come from law enforcement. Law enforcement is not going to protect the proletariat. They are the instrument of the bourgeoisie. They have no interest in protecting the proletariat. They're class traders. And so you have to understand that there's nobody to protect these guys. There's nobody to protect gay people in this country. Uh, do you think the politicians are going to do it? Well, maybe a few, but most of them are simply doing that for opportunism. And if it really came down to it, if Trump really wanted to smash far left elements in this country and smash progressive movements, um, I don't think the mainstream Democratic Party would put up much of a fight. They may feign some kind of resistance, but uh, ultimately, as we've seen with liberal ideology again and again and again, it ultimately falls in line behind fascism and sides against the proletarian revolution. And so when Chomsky says when confrontation shifts to the arena of violence, it's the toughest and most brutal who win. But the confrontation has already shifted there. When fascists walk the streets in Charlottesville, that is a direct display of violence. It's fascists going down the street saying Jews will not replace us, uh, blood and soil. It's essentially a call for the killing of Jews and the establishment of a white ethno state. So if that's not a violent display or a shift to the arena of violence, I don't know what is. Once again, Chomsky's sort of putting the burden on the left as being the ones who instigated this violence, but I don't think he understands that the violence came from the right, this shift towards fascism and ultranationalism. Uh, And he says it's the toughest and most brutal who win. Well, it's not the toughest and most brutal who win. It's whoever controls the means of production. And so the struggle for this would ultimately turn into a struggle over the means of production of things such as, if this really went to the full-blown Civil War scale, um, level of violence that Chomsky seems to indicate. Uh, it would be whoever controls the weaponry and the minds of the people and the strongholds, the well fortified, well defendable areas. But I mean, all of this is complete and utter nonsense. It's a pipe dream to think that there's going to be some kind of like Antifa uprising, like we'll talk about in in my upcoming episode about the November 14th Antifa conspiracy theories. Um, you know, people don't have anything to fear from violence against fascism, unless you're a fascist. The only people who should be afraid of Antifa are like skinheads and white supremacists. And anybody who will tell you otherwise is just some kind of reactionary alarmist, uh, somebody who focuses on the machinations of the outrage machine and the PC liberal agenda. Those kinds of reactionaries really aren't even worth listening to. And this was written um, Saturday, so this was written very quickly after the Charlottesville incident. So it was a hot take from Noam Chomsky. Um, and in part two, we will read the second half of this article because I want to see if he sort of clarifies himself. I hope he does because it's kind of disappointing seeing Chomsky say this kind of thing. Um, it seems some of the criticisms I've seen leveled at Chomsky is that he can be too mild in his approach to the proletarian revolution, and seemingly from this article, it uh, that accusation doesn't seem without merit. So in part two, we'll read the second half of this article, and we will see.